Good morning, good afternoon, good evening, and welcome to another episode of the Sweet Nothings podcast. If you are new here, or in case you've forgotten, this is your home of relaxed, funny, and informative chats all about the love of eating. We'll talk about the latest food trends, controversial opinions, and all things edible. My name is Kelly, and I will be the one happily whispering said sweet nothings in your ear about just about everything I can remember that's gone on in the food world over the last month and a bit. I hope summer is treating you well so far. It is bloody hot, but we're enjoying all the same, and we're trying to not complain because I do that too much and too well. Today I want to talk to you guys about our collective global obsession, or just about global obsession, with condiments, as in the pre-bought kind, the kind you can buy in a bottle, a tub, or a jar that we just collectively cannot get enough of. We need it on our food, we want it on our food, we're obsessed. But before we get into that, we have a food trend and a little bit of food news to touch upon, so let's do so. In terms of food trends, or food trend singular, TikTok has been absolutely overwhelmed by but one singular food trend this month, and honestly, while it is food related, it's more of a horror trend than it is a food trend. And I don't mean that in the way that I meant it about the kind of crazy water TikTok people. If you are unaware, the grimace shake is a thing that's been popping up all over TikTok and various other, also onto Instagram and to YouTube Shorts afterwards, as well as it always does. And it's all kind of sprung from McDonald's, I believe, announcing they were going to make a milkshake, or actually making a milkshake, or threatening to make a milkshake themed around Grimace, one of their kind of corporate characters alongside Ronald McDonald and the Hamburglar and stuff. Much more US-centric than anywhere else in the world, perhaps, obviously. And Grimace is a big purple gentleman. Don't know much about his character, can't speak to it, to be honest, haven't met him in person, but people just in their endless kind of creativity decided that they were going to make a trend of this milkshake basically killing people. So the idea being that Grimace is some kind of like secret villain, and that drinking the Grimace shake was going to kill you. Or maybe he is a villain. Maybe in the McDonald's corporate lore, he already is a villain. I don't actually know. His name would suggest it, though he does look particularly and less than threateningly fluffy. So the Grimace shake involved people making their own kind of purple milkshake things, drinking it, and then cutting to footage of them dead, basically. And I'll just, for any of those out there listening that are quite sensitive to scary things or to jump scares, or aren't just aren't a fan of kind of scary stuff in horror movies, I would encourage a little bit of prudence as you search for these things, because some of these videos are genuinely very well done in that they are actually frightening. And, it stems just from, some people joking around just kind of having choked on this milkshake or lying on the ground with this milkshake. Some have gotten very creative with their kind of death scenes. And this is why I say it's much more of a kind of horror movie fan trend than it is a food trend per se. But it's been about the only thing kind of consuming social media in that viral way that these things do compared to other things. But that's pretty normal. It's the summer. People are thinking less and less about kind of food and cooking and baking, because in many parts of the world, it's just too warm. It's just not the time. Our minds are on barbecues and day drinking rather than spending time over a hot stove or in front of the oven. Can't speak for myself. I've been making cheesecake and cookies this week. I've been eating and cooking pasta just as much as often, to my own detriment in this Italian heat. But for the most part, food and food trends often do take a back seat over the hotter months. That said, though, we have had a couple of new foodstuffs introduced for all of my British listeners. For example, Walker's, the big crisp brand, for some reason this month released 3 brand new flavors of crisps, all themed around existing flavors of crisps. And I just couldn't help enjoy the kind of parallels that we see with other forms of, repackaged or remade stuff. For example, our current obsession when it comes to movies and just remaking old movies, rebooting them, remastering them. Also the same when it comes to TV shows. For whatever reason, Disney need to make a new version of every Disney film that came out, less than 30 years ago. We need to have reboots of Harry Potter being discussed and remakes of games and all of this kind of stuff. And it just reminded me so much of this. These crisps already exist. But let me clarify. What's-Its, Doritos, and Monster Munch all currently exist. They're not some kind of discontinued, super exclusive, expensive, difficult to find products. They exist. You can find them on shelves very easily in the UK. However, Walkers, for any non-UK listeners, that's like what we call Lay's. It's the Lay's brand in the UK, basically, have decided to launch normal Walker's potato crisps flavored like What's-Its, Doritos, and Monster Munch, respectively. And I don't understand why. What's-Its, I'll never understand their existence anyway. I think they are quite literally one of the worst kinds of crisps ever invented. They're these kind of, crunchy, but also light, puffed corn snacks with that artificial cheese flavor. Doritos, more specifically the chili heatwave Doritos, one of my absolute favorite crisps. They've decided to remake into a regular crisp, taking away, in my opinion, all of the joy of the shape and crunchiness of an actual Dorito. And doing the same with Monster Munch, which is a monster foot shaped puffed corn snack thing, which tastes just violently of pickled onion. But again, half the fun of this crisp is its texture and the fact it's so big and it's got a really particular kind of shape and mouthfeel. To put that into a normal crisp just doesn't feel right. And also, why? Why? I don't know. Do you? I don't know. Similarly, Toblerone have decided to release a kind of why was this made product this month in releasing Toblerone truffles. Now, Toblerone is something that I think of when I think either of Christmas, office leaving gifts, or duty-free airport chocolate purchases for people you forgot to buy something for when you were actually on holiday. So to make these into truffles is already a bit unusual. The idea being that it's kind of regular milk chocolate, or as close to regular milk chocolate as it can be on the outside, with a soft filling that has the usual Toblerone nougat, almond, honey bits inside. And it's not shaped like a Toblerone pyramid, or whatever, prism, pyramid, whichever shape the Toblerone bits usually are. If they'd done that, I think I would have quite liked this. It would have been like individual pieces of Toblerone, but you were swindled, it's actually a truffle. But instead, they're just these weird kind of geometric shapes that don't really hold any resemblance to an actual Toblerone bar, which is the whole iconic thing about a Toblerone. So again, a couple of products I don't really understand, but one that I was quite happy to see is that a company I have always enjoyed little chocolatey treats from have decided to start releasing big shading bars. A company called Monty Bojangles, who I reviewed on the channel, a long time ago, several years ago, and I've often bought little chocolates from. It's not the kind of most crazy high quality craft chocolate, nor is it the most affordable mass market chocolate. It's somewhere in between. It's something a bit different, something a bit fancy. They're most kind of known for their cocoa dusted truffles, which are really, really nice. In terms of mouthfeel, they're very smooth. And they have started releasing chocolate bars, like flavoured chocolate bars in bigger shading sizes, which is nice to see. When I get back to the UK, I would like to try a couple to see if they're, as good as the little truffles that they do or how they are. But that's an interesting one for any kind of UK chocolate lovers or lovers of imported UK chocolate, wherever you're listening from. But moving on from various food nonsense with a little bit of nice food news in there and a scary food trend, of course, let's move on to what I want to just have a little chin wag about today, and that is our fascination with condiments. And I don't just mean the Brits, I mean everywhere. Every single corner of the sphere in which we all inhabit is just fixated on condiments of various kinds. And I want to talk about those condiments, and I want to talk a little bit about why I think that is, just to kind of remind you that it's not all, you know, junk food, and that it's not all just something that you shouldn't use too much of, that these things can really stick with us for a reason, not just because we like the taste. And I think our obsession with condiments can be kind of easily broken down into three very different things. The same way that our love of lots of food can come from. There's a kind of societal element, a biological element, and also even a little bit of a psychological element, I think. And then we'll get into just some of the tastiest condiments to round off nicely with. First and foremost, I think it's most likely that our love of condiments comes from the fact that they are a cheap and accessible way to add flavor without adding loads of individual ingredients. If you live alone, for example, having a full spice rack, a fully stocked cupboard of lots of ingredients is not only unlikely, it's actually quite unreasonable, because unless you're cooking for yourself fully 3 meals a day from scratch, it's unlikely you're going to be using all of those things while they're still fresh and useful. So having condiments that can add just that little kick of flavor without having to have loads of stuff in your cupboard space, which you may not even have, or having to spend even more money on all of these little individual elements, that I think is what draws us to it so much initially. For example, buying one bottle of Worcester sauce is like buying a bottle of instant umami flavor to add to anything. Having a bottle of barbecue sauce means that you never have to have dry or tasteless meat on your plate. Having a little bottle of Tabasco or a little bottle of Frank's or Cholula sauce, whichever one you prefer, means that you can have an instant kick of heat without having to constantly have fresh chilies that you need to get through in the fridge. And alongside that, it's a really accessible way to start experimenting with new flavors for people who also can't cook yet. Whether you're really young and it's just something, it's a life skill you haven't learned yet, or whether you're someone who doesn't have a lot of time, or someone who is just beginning their experimentation in cooking and in the kitchen in general, they can be a great way to learn about how different tastes go with different things, about how little dashes of something can really transform a whole plate. And alongside that, I think they can be kind of something, and without getting too deep into it straight away, I think there's something that can actually hold our kind of region or nation's flavor preferences or even traditions inside one little tiny container. For example, if you say brown sauce or brune sauce, depending on where in the country you are, to someone in the UK, they know what it is. They know what the bottle looks like. They know what it tastes like. They know what it goes with. But that's something you couldn't necessarily apply to the rest of the world. If you were to say salsa rosa to people in other countries, they wouldn't necessarily know what it was, but Italians would know what it was, probably how to make it, and also how to eat it. There's just something about it that kind of brings together this collective knowledge of, of flavors and their combinations. And not only can they represent your nation, they can even represent the region that you're in. For example, something that I love is the fact that different parts of the UK have different condiments that they like to have when they go to a chippy, a fish and chip shop. For example, in Edinburgh, not too far away from my hometown, it's salt and kind of watered down brown sauce. In some parts of the country, it's salt and vinegar. For others, it's just ketchup. For others, it's very much gravy. For others, it's curry sauce. And it's just something that really, really kind of pinpoints where on earth you are from, just with something as minor as a couple of dashes of sauce. A minor little kind of factoid that I love is that different countries in Europe don't have even the same kinds of mayonnaise. Here in Italy, no one puts mustard into mayonnaise. It's just an ingredient that isn't used. And as a result, every time I eat mayonnaise here, I think it tastes a little bit bland. It's like it's missing something. It's missing some acidity, some bitterness, some heat. And similarly, if a French person was to taste British mayonnaise, they would think it was really bland too. They would think it was really bland too, because it doesn't have the right amount of mustard that they're used to in their mayonnaise, or it may have less lemon juice. Italians might use more oil, or they might use different kinds of oil compared to Spain, for example. And I love that something that's so similar can be so different and be so dependent on where you're from. And I think that's one of the best things about condiments, that it can tie together so many different countries and yet have such lovely little regional differences too. And as I said, it can even hold kind of years of tradition in one thing. For example, countries in Northern Europe that have colder climates tend to love condiments that have a slightly more acidic flavor because of our nation's histories with pickling, with preserving, because we had to use vinegar to keep things fresher for longer. We love vinegar on our chips. We love that sour kind of acidic flavor, whereas you'll find that other countries with sunnier weather just aren't as keen on those flavors because they just weren't as exposed to it 10 years ago, 60 years ago, 200 years ago. And I think that's just a little fascinating part of food culture. In terms of the kind of slightly more obvious biological element, condiments are an absolutely amazing way to enhance the flavour of food in just a matter of seconds with no technique, with no skill. Like I said, if you're someone who can't cook or just won't cook, it's one of the best ways to just immediately enhance whatever it is that you're eating, whether it's an individual food or a whole plate of food. Our mouths love highly flavored food. Our bodies want to incentivize us to eat and to eat good quality food to give us the right amount of fuel and to make sure that we're, giving ourselves enough energy. If food is bland, we're not going to be particularly happy or impressed about eating large amounts of it. With a condiment added, however, plain white rice or plain chips, plain meat, slightly bland leftovers that have lost a bit of their texture can just be absolutely ramped up with something a little bit kind of focused and specific. And not only that, as well as us all collectively loving the kind of enhancement of food, just biologically speaking, our tongues, noses, and our brains love it. It's something that also allows us to play with the particular taste that we like. Again, perhaps depending on where you're from, but also depending on your specific taste preferences. Some people love fatty flavors. Whether that's a specific thing from person to person, or whether you're from a region or a country that has a lot of high fat food and your palate is just really well acquainted with it. Some people love acidic flavors and sour flavors, so they're going to want to add something like that to their dish to bring it up to their preferred taste. Some people prefer sweet foods. Some people love spicy foods because they're from a family or a region or a country that has always used really kind of hot or spicy or highly flavored food that just doesn't seem to be as tasty without it. And condiments, instead of using specific spices or herbs or ingredients or cooking methods, for the fattiness, you can just add a little bit of extra virgin olive oil, of mayonnaise, of aioli. If you want acidic, you can add vinegar, you can add hot sauce. If you want sweet, you can add ketchup, you can add barbecue sauce, you can add honey. If you want spicy, you can add, relishes, you can add salsas, all of this kind of stuff. And I just think the actual taste enhancing part has to be mentioned when we're talking about our biological love for these condiments too. But not only that, I think when we're talking about biological enjoyment and the fact that our taste buds and our palates genuinely love consuming condiments like this, and how I've spoken about how there's years of tradition and regional differences and national differences, even continental differences for the most part, I think there is also a psychological element, without making it sound too creepy, a psychological element to enjoying these condiments and being so fixated on specific condiments too. And by that, obviously, you can include things like brand loyalty, how some people think that Heinz ketchup tastes so much better than Branston or Daddy's or own brand ketchup, or how some people will only eat Hellmann's mayonnaise, how some people will only have Coleman's mustard, some people will only have Sarson's vinegar, some people will only have that very specific kebab shop garlic mayonnaise. Some people need to have Frank's buffalo sauce. There's little elements that we associate with brands in a psychological way. But also something that I kind of thought about while planning for this episode was what they can provide in just a few little shakes in terms of familiarity, or in terms of the opposite of familiarity. For example, think of how much Restaurants that aren't Italian love to use pesto to make anything taste Italian or to taste Mediterranean. Think about how people will use hummus to add a certain Middle Eastern flavor or Middle Eastern kind of vibe to certain dishes. Think about how much legwork soy sauce and wasabi do, respectively, when it comes to adding a kind of Far East Asian or Pan Asian flavor to certain dishes. It's things like this that we can use just to add a certain, almost like a way of traveling without actually needing to travel. It gives you the taste of a specific place or part of the world in just one bottle, you know? And on the flip side of that, I think it's something that can provide a lot of kind of comfort and familiarity for people. Whether it makes something taste like your family growing up, you know, maybe you had a weird kind of fixation with mixing ketchup and mayonnaise together when you were a kid, and doing so as an adult brings you back kind of fond memories of when you were growing up. For example, hot chips doused in vinegar will always make me think of my mum, or roast chicken not being eaten with gravy as it should be, in my opinion, but being eaten with a big hunking dollop of mayonnaise on the side will always make me think of my husband. It's, you know, little things like that that sort of bring you the flavors of you know, nostalgia or of kind of familiarity of home. Similarly, if you're someone like me who has moved to another part of a country, or you've moved country altogether, little kind of use of condiments can add little tastes of home to whatever it is that you're making. As I spoke about in an earlier podcast episode, I have a personal fixation with Worcester sauce. It's one of my favorite things on the planet. I adore it. And just a couple of dashes of that on its own on things or as an ingredient when cooking tastes right to me. It makes the food taste how it's supposed to in my head. It tastes like back home. It tastes like my family's cooking. It tastes like British food, and I mean that in a good way, even if it doesn't sound like it. It adds that very specific savory flavor that soy sauce can't quite do, that, you know, teriyaki sauce can't quite do, that vinegar can't quite do. And it's something that, even though it's far more expensive and not as easy to find here in Italy, I will always, always, always have a bottle of it in my cupboard for that reason. And something obviously that came up when, again, doing a little bit of prep for this month's episode was just some of the most popular condiments from around the world, and just how joyful it made me to kind of cycle through them and think about how they tasted and think about all of the ways you can use them, how we all use them in different ways. And I got it from Taste Atlas. Just when you Google something along the lines of, you know, most popular condiments around the world, you'll get one of these big lists. And this Taste Atlas one brought, in no particular order, just some of the most used and most beloved and highest rated condiments from all over the planet. For example, the top three being three big, heavy hitting Asian condiments in wasabi, miso, and soy sauce. Soy sauce can be used in just about everything. It's great in sweet food, it's great in salty food, it's great on its own, it's great as an ingredient. Miso is exactly the same. It's got this really, really specific, savory, almost like fermented taste, whether it's the kind of milder, light stuff or the heavily fermented, darker stuff that you use in soups. Wasabi, while probably a little bit less versatile, is one of those super unique ingredients in its color and its flavor. Not everyone loves it. They don't love the kind of inner nose tingle heat that it can provide. But again, what a fabulous way to completely liven up a dull plate of food. We move on similarly to wasabi, though a little bit less violent, with Tabasco sauce. Hot sauces in general, for example, like I said, Frank's hot sauce, or the Cholula, the kind of Latin American hot sauce, and all of the other brands that I won't be remembering the name of, but are equally delicious with that kind of slightly sour, garlicky heat that they add it onto meat, add it into even to pasta sauce. Italians, if you're listening, I'm sorry, but it just adds that really specific sour heat that is so good and just lights up your whole tongue wanting to eat more of it. Something a little bit different in maple syrup is apparently one of the world's most beloved condiments. And again, I totally understand when it comes to sweet things, whether it's a topping on a cake, whether you stir it into something, whether you use it as a glaze for meat before cooking, also delicious. It's got this very specific, deep flavor that you can't get from just white sugar or just honey, for example. Sriracha has its own whole field separate from the other soy sauces, the other hot sauces, sorry, which is totally understandable because it again has the most addictive heat. That garlicky, super savory, like ramped up, well-rounded hot flavor that goes so well with so many dishes. It goes well with meat. It works perfectly with rice. You can throw it on top of things. You could use it as an ingredient. It's just delicious. I didn't discover it until I was in my early 20s, but again, it is something that we always have in the cupboard, even since we moved here to Italy. Dijon mustard was also on the list, of course, originally being from France and used in various kind of sauces or just on its own or in marinades. It's so versatile and similar to wasabi, though slightly less violent. It has a very specific heat thanks to those mustard seeds in there. Yellow mustard was also on the list, slightly less popular. You know, that's what we think of when we think of like hot dog mustard, like the American mustard. And while not everyone would love it, especially for European taste, I adore yellow mustard. To me, it's like the perfectly balanced kind of mustard. English mustard is wonderful in how aggressive it is and in what it can add to, you know, bechamel, to mayonnaise, to marinades for meat, how well it goes with roasted meats, for example, red meats or in sandwiches. But there's something about yellow mustard that just has that perfect kind of sweetness and creaminess to it at the same time, that if you're having it with like a really salty kind of meat, it's just so good. Ketchup is obviously on the list. Ketchup being probably the world's favorite over-sweetened tomato condiment, found on every single continent on the planet and used for just as many things as any of these other condiments. A favorite among kids and adults. Not something I often keep in the house, to be honest, but if I'm having chips, I'm having ketchup, you know. Aioli was on the list, or aioli. I'm never entirely sure how it's pronounced, which is a kind of creamy, garlicky mayonnaise, which again goes perfectly with meats. It goes well in salads and burgers and sandwiches. Gochujang, the Korean chili paste, is on here. Probably a bit too much for a lot of people to have straight up, but when added to noodle dishes, when added to specific kind of like Korean barbecue style stuff as well, my word. It's much like sriracha, a very unique heat and a gorgeous color to go with it, which just kind of draws you in for more, even if your mouth is already screaming. Balsamic vinegar is on the list, and or specifically Modena balsamic vinegar, although that probably goes without saying for any Italian listeners. It's incredible. It does what no other vinegar can do in terms of how deep and rich and sticky and bold it is. You need so little of it for such a big, powerful flavor, and it's just gorgeous. Often misused in many recipes, but still delicious even when misused. My girl Worcester sauce was on the list, again, because of the million things that can be used in and on, even if it's just a couple of dashes on some cheese on toast, or whether you're using it to make Mary Rose sauce, whatever it is. Gravy, Worcester sauce and gravy for me is irreplaceable. Brown sauce was on the list also, that lovely kind of specific meaty but also sweet but also acidic unique flavor that brown sauce has. If you're outside of the UK, you may never have tried it. It often looks very similar to barbecue sauce, but is not to be confused with it when tasted or even smelt. Far more aggressive in terms of its acidity, much more vinegary. It goes so well with chips, with bacon, with meat in a sandwich, with a fry up, with baked beans, with fried eggs. It cuts perfectly through hearty, heavy British winter food, and I'm seriously craving it now. Harissa was on the list, also very much deservedly. Harissa, I believe, is of North African origin, and again, with meat or in a sauce, in some kind of stew, with vegetables, with couscous. Delicious. Frite sauce. I'm never sure how to say it, but the specific kind of almost sweetened mayonnaise that goes on top of those Belgian style and those Dutch style chips in a cone. Correct me if I'm wrong in any of those details, but I don't really know how else to describe it. It's like a thicker, sweeter, almost like a whipped looking mayonnaise stuff that's very specifically to be eaten with frites. Kewpie mayonnaise, the Japanese brand, specifically made the list. I don't know if I've ever tasted it specifically, or if I have, I didn't know about it. It's not something I've ever bought, but I believe it's the kind that you would use in like bao buns, for example, which I have had many of and have enjoyed. So maybe I have tasted it, but it's very, very specifically beloved for its unique flavor. Marmite, my beloved Marmite / Vegemite, also made the list of super popular and beloved condiments, rightly so. Much like Worcester sauce, you can use it on its own. A little bit of butter and some Marmite and some toast is a uniquely savory experience, but also using it as a little kind of super savory umami ingredient in a gravy, in a sauce, in a stew, unrivaled. Vegemite offering, a very Australian and also slightly milder alternative, and very, very, very happy to see a new fixation of mine, but a very deep and profound fixation of mine nonetheless. That being, it's either Ajvar or Ivar, I'm not sure. However, this is a Croatian pepper paste stuff, like a relish. It's usually made, I believe, with mostly peppers as in the vegetable, not like specifically chili peppers, but also a little bit of heat in there. I think there's also aubergines, some salt, some oil, like some lemon, and it is unreal, with meat in sandwiches as a dip, as a little ingredient, a little bit added to pasta sauce. Whether you get the kind of mild version or the spicier version, it's gorgeous. It's such a kind of massive punch in the face of pepper flavor, and it's so, so tasty. It's also not too acidic, not too sweet, not too salty. And there's like an actual dose of vegetables in there too. It's absolutely stunning. It's not something you can find everywhere in the world. Obviously, Northeast Italy, where I am, its proximity to Croatia means that you can get it in several places, and I love it. It's one of the best condiments I've ever discovered, and there is always a jar in my fridge. A particularly trashy favourite of mine is to have it with like a generous amount of melted butter and use that as a sauce for gnocchi. It's an insult to like 3 countries at once, but it's really, really tasty. And that, honestly, is those are probably the highlights. There were a couple of other kind of condiments in there, specific kinds of salts and other more unique sauces that are a bit more niche. But from that list and from what I had to say about condiments, I'm gonna leave it there. I love condiments. We all love condiments. And while I think some people kind of look down their nose at them, they think it means that you're cheating a little bit or that you're cheapening a food, they have their place in the kitchen. They have their place on the dining table. They have their place in so many different cuisines and cultures and dishes for a reason. They're delicious, they're accessible, they're affordable, they're often very unique, and they can be like a door to another part of the world without actually having to leave your own kitchen. I love them. Do let me know via social media if you want to, your favorites. If there's any kind of obvious ones that I missed, let me know on Instagram. Let me know, send me an email or something if you like. I always love hearing kind of what you like to do with condiments and your preferred way of having them. Like I said, if there's any I missed, do let me know. But I'm afraid that is all I have time for today. Thank you for listening to today's ramblings, today's sweet nothings, all about our condiment obsession, our sauce fixation. I hope you've enjoyed every bit as much as I have, and I will see you in the next one.